And I'm Neil Marriott. I'm the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Management Education. And this is a special issue of that journal that Dirk is going to be leading on as guest editor.
Thank you very much, Neil. My name is Dirk Moosmayer. I am in Germany, as I'm German, kind of working at KEDGE Business School in France, thus also connected to the France and Benelux chapter for the PRME. As Neil mentioned, I'm kind of editing or co-editing the special issue on creative teaching methods, creating pedagogies in the International Journal of Management Education. In terms of background, I have been part of the expert pedagogy group that co-developed the playbook of the I5 methods. In the past, I've been in various editorial positions, including kind of an associate editor with the Academy of Management Learning Education. We kind of co-edited a SAGE handbook for responsible management learning education. I'm on also some of the editorial boards of the kind of other sides, so the business ethics side, including Journal of Business Ethics and Business Ethics, a European Review, now Business Ethics, the Environment and Responsibility. So that in terms of background, how I fit in between there, and I guess that's part of the reason why Neil asked me to co-edit this issue. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you could attend the session today. I appreciate that some of you have got earthly hours to attend, so it's good that you're here. We'll have question and answers a little bit later. Just a bit about the journal. The journal gets an awful lot of submissions, get about 100 a month, 1,200 a year. All submissions come in to me, and I usually allocate to an editor if needs be, or I'll deal with the paper myself. It's a double-blind review, so you have to remember that. It's a fully double-blind review process, at least 2 reviewers, sometimes 3. And the acceptance rate isn't that brilliant, but I'll tell you a little bit about that now. It's only about 10% of the submissions get through. I get an awful lot of submissions that are inappropriate. They're not being properly targeted at the journal. So I get issues to do with the management of schools or whatever. The journal is all about business school education, and management education is the subjects that have been taught in business schools. Now, I don't expect a 10% acceptance rate for the special issue. I expect to be much, much higher, more like 50% possibly, because it's going to be targeted. And so I won't be desk rejecting that many papers, because they would be, they would be for the special issue, and so people know it's for the special issue. I'm sure that people will see the word special issue and will decide, hey, I'll give this paper a chance, and if it doesn't fit with the special issue, then obviously I'm going to be desk rejecting it, or maybe if it is appropriate for the journal, maybe target them at the main journal. But I will be the first protocol, the first quality control source. And that's what that helps then Dirk and the other co-editors, so they know that papers they get are going to be worthwhile of their consideration. Now, the site score is the main KPI that the publisher uses. The site score that you see on the website is about 7.1. It's currently 10.2 if you look at Scopus. This is quite a high site score for the journal. Means we have very, very high usage rates, so that if your papers are fortunate enough to get in, you can expect quite a lot of downloads, quite a lot of citations, so H indexes will be good. We get around about 400,000 downloads a year, and they are across the globe. The other thing to say is I'm fortunate over the last 22 years or so, I've built up 1,500 or so reviewers, and they are international reviewers. The clue is in the title of the journal, is the International Journal. So I'm trying to appeal to a wide global readership, and don't be surprised if the reviewers you get are not from your geographic domain. They might be from other parts of the world, other continents even, and that's a clue to how you write your work. Do not be parochial in your work. You're trying to appeal to a very wide readership. And even if your work is quite specific, it could be a single institution case study, there's probably generalizable lessons that people across the world would like to hear from you. So that would be my big, big tip. Be international in your focus. Don't write with any acronyms or anything that other people outside your domain won't know, right? So that's a massive tip. It is in the top decile. It's number 89 in the world of 1,467 of education research journals. So pedagogy is important. So you need to make sure you've got pedagogic theoretical frameworks that you're using to support your work. Okay, so I get so many papers come through that that's where the main weakness is. So not international and not rooted in pedagogy. That's another one. Again, I don't expect either of this from the special issue, but it's just top tips if you are submitting a paper to the journal. And the other thing is that a lot of papers I get, they don't actually demonstrate their contribution and appeal to the readership by citing the journal itself. Now, this isn't about self-citation. This doesn't affect the cite score, for example. That gets taken out of the cite score. All it does, it indicates to a reviewer that, hey, you know, this paper, it's up to date, and it's going to be of interest to the readership. That's the only reason if I say that, right? It doesn't influence the cite score. Self-citation of the journals is taken out of that cite score, but it's just there to appeal to the readership and to appeal to reviewers. So often reviewers reject papers because they say the lit review's out of date, or the lit review doesn't really include anything from the journal, so it's not relevant to the readership. So those are my top tips for submitting to the journal. So be international, don't be parochial, make sure you've got pedagogic research in there, and make sure that you've cited the journal wherever possible. We had a massive special issue of the journal on Prime in edition 16. It was one of our most heavily cited editions of the journal, so there's plenty there that you can draw on, I'm sure. So that's enough from me. I'm going to sign off now, and I'll let you ask me some questions later. So that's bye from me for now. Thank you.
And what I want to do is talking a bit about the special issue, explaining the link to the I5 methods and project, and then also talking a bit more about potential ideas that one could do in terms of research around the I5 that go beyond the special issue. First, as Neil clarified, right, how should you think of submitting to the journal, writing for the journal? The first thing is understand what the journal is, and as Neil mentioned, it's about management education, and it's not about secondary schools or something, and it's clearly kind of targeted on international readership, and all that is very compatible with the PRME, right? It is a United Nations connected initiative, so it's clearly international. We've got a global reach. We might, beyond being kind of international or global in the editor group, also have a lot of the other, for example, people kind of who've been developing the I5 in the expert pedagogy group, linking to that. It is clearly about management education. It's the principles of responsible management education connected to business schools, to higher education. So that's the field that it is about. In terms of creating teaching methods, so the theme is really on pedagogy. Part of the background is that a lot of work in the PRME context has been focusing on content. The question, what should we teach? And the I5 project, and connected to that, although still very distinct in terms of the issue, but the issue says clearly, we want to not look into what should we teach, but how do we teach? How do we develop responsible leaders? So it's about responsible management, responsible leadership development through pedagogies, through the ways we teach. That's what we try to understand as part of this, or through this special issue. We are on the next slide, looking a bit further into the details, and that is also what you then find into the call. So first the team, you got to know Neil and Dirk already. Meredith Story is kind of the senior manager for the I5 at the PRME level. So there is a strong PRME connection that is further strengthened with Gustavo, who is kind of manager of engagement in the field. In terms of the timeline, we expect submissions to be in by 31st of August this year. The submission system probably opens 1st of July. You've got the link to the editorial manager of the International Journal of Management Education there. Don't forget to kind of click in the submission systems and clarify that you're submitting for the special issue creative teaching methods. On the next slide, we're then going more into the contents. And exactly these contents are also clarified in the call. But what is the special issue about? The special issue explores pedagogical innovation for the development of responsible management skills, where you could understand skills as happening on a cognitive, on a behavioral, and in a personal level among students, professionals, as well as educators. So we've got the responsible management perspective, we've got the skills competence perspective. So what do people actually need to do something? And then I think that's the important what I mentioned here in terms of students, professionals, as well as educators. So we are looking or accepting papers that focus on students and how students develop and learn. But we are as well looking at what's happening in the management world. So if you're working on an executive level with professionals or in other kind of corporate related projects and you're talking about learning of professionals, that is something that we would clearly see in there. You could think of having something that is within corporate development potentially. With that kind of things, perhaps speak early to us how they're best framed so that they're still fitting the educational level, if it's really purely in company, as well as educators. So how do we as educators actually learn and develop competence? We would expect some kind of assessment or some mentioning in a perspective on impact. So how does what you're doing actually show impact? How is that effective? So impact and effectiveness of such innovation. And that could include the development of cognitive behavior and personal competences, competence development. Sustainable development is an interdisciplinary issue. It's something that's not happening only in the business school. It connects businesses with sciences, with social sciences, and with humanities. And so from that perspective, right, we're not kind of changing what Neil said in terms of we're clearly about the business school, but we are highly inviting looks to outside and tell us how that kind of can innovate what we are doing. So we're not interested in something that exclusively tells about how science is being taught. But if you find something that is taught, how science is taught, and you say, look, if business schools would use that, this and this how it could look like, and this is how it could be and why it would be effective, that would be a perfect match. So it's clearly the link on the business schools always need to be in there, but we are strongly inviting you to look out to other disciplines and clarify what can we learn from them, learn from them yourself and share your learning, help learning with your audience, with the readers. We also strongly encourage views that go beyond, again, traditional business schools, business school pedagogies, that's what I said. And we're kind of asking for a connection to the sustainable development goals in a sense that, yes, it is, I think, but I kind of leave it later on to clarify. So there was a question on the ABCD list coming in, sorry for that. So we're looking for a perspective that is about responsible leadership, and our understanding of responsible leadership is one of responsibility, sustainability, and ethics aspects. So these three elements that are typically integrated in a responsibility context. And we do expect some connection to the SDGs simply because that's the dominant framework at the moment. What we mean by connection is that somewhere in the paper you're making these connections and you're clarifying where this fits in and how that relates to the tensions that you have between different sustainable development goals. That does not mean that we're exclusively looking for teaching interventions about the sustainable development goals. That's absolutely not the case. But we're expecting some link on how does that, what we're doing here in the classroom, what we're discussing in terms of impact, how does that connect to the SDGs? On the next slide, we're kind of developing three specific aspects that we would expect papers to deliver and to connect to. Again, both the slide before and this one is very much copy paste from the call, but we're not kind of telling you secrets here. We're just trying to explain very clearly what exactly is it that we're looking for. The paper would usually center on pedagogy. That's made clear. So again, we're not looking at other aspects, but we're really focused on pedagogy. How do we teach? How do we deliver content? How do we support learning of the students? Specifically addressing theories and methods of teaching and other learning interventions. We usually expect some theoretical perspective in there, in spite of all practical relevance. Emphasis is placed on exploring creative and novel approaches to teaching and learning interventions. So we would expect the paper to be very clear in terms of what do we learn, what does it do that isn't there yet. If it's very much, for example, just in quotation mark, an application of an existing theory or something that's been discussed a lot, then we say, well, but what's really the new thing? So we're looking to kind of take this idea of the field of responsible leadership education forward by adding new pedagogical approaches that can help us to teach and develop leaders, responsible leaders, more effectively. The second aspect, that's also a bit already mentioned before, the papers would explore themes of ethics, responsibility, and sustainability. So in that kind of ERS domain, explicitly acknowledging the interconnected and holistic nature of the Sustainable Development Goal. Given the interrelated nature of the SDGs and the urgency to address these global issues in business and in society, we encourage all papers to embody that framing. Finally, and the third aspect, the paper addresses the critical skills development. So what is it really that responsible leaders and managers need to know, need to be able to do, need to embody as people? So we're having that domain of skills, critical skills development that we expect in here. That can be, and that's also clarifying here, we can have theoretical papers, conceptual papers without any data, or just developing a theoretical perspective. We accept qualitative papers, we accept quantitative papers. Usually we do, in all three of them, expect some kind of theoretical contribution in a way that, again, it makes clear how it advances our understanding of the field and how it generically helps us doing something better. Finally, again, that idea of impact. Impact may be, you can turn, right? Impact may be the dominant perspective or just an outlook. So similar to the SDGs, right? You're not expected to produce an SDG paper. You're supposed to have a link in there so that it's clear how it fits in. Similar with regard to impact, right? You could write a paper on impact measurement for creative pedagogies, but what we're looking for here is often just a perspective on how would I measure impact, or have I shown impact, but that doesn't need to be a big empirical piece, but that could be sometimes just qualitative feedback from the students, for example, to support and give some idea of what actually the effectiveness of this is. So impact, again, as potentially just an outlook, but it should be in there. Thank you. And on the next slide. So up to here, we're actually very much with, this is what the special issue is about. And I'm happy to answer more questions in the Q&A field. Many of you may have seen this. So we're setting this in the I5 context. So we've got the I5 pedagogical framework here. I would expect, in the way it's been communicated, that probably the majority of you have probably had an introductory workshop on the I5. But for those who've never seen this, right, it's useful to look at it. Right? There is a kind of I5 playbook of the principles of responsible management education, free material. You can Google for it. You'll find them easily, all free downloads. And I would recommend reading that to understand the context in which the people here think. Although technically, right, if you look at the call, it doesn't mention I5 anywhere, so it's not an I5 special issue. But of course, the I5 project is a project within PRME that exactly is born from that fundamental idea from which also the special issue comes, saying we've done a lot of work on what we teach to develop responsible leaders. And we're now focusing on how do we actually teach effectively to develop responsible leaders. And that's where these 5 elements have been developed. And one could think of looking at a specific perspective of these. One could look at technology that can support all 5. One could dig into one of the that you find on the right side in this bubble, what we call teaching moves. You could look at a specific teaching move and explore or to develop also some innovative aspect that could be developed in there. On the next slide, I'm kind of reconnecting that a bit to different aspects with a further outlook. So research that develops on the I5 method. So that takes exactly these 5 bubbles there for remembering these ones. So research that develops on these methods, that explores the boundary conditions, right? When does it work? Under which conditions does it work? When does something not work? What can we learn from that for how and when we should effectively apply the I5 and developing that further. Research that assesses the impact of using I5 methods and examples are just some themes that could perfectly fit into the IJME special issue. There are also aspects that could as well fit, for example, in other kind of management education journals, or that could fit into, for example, something like a teaching business ethics or business ethics learning education section of the Journal of Business Ethics. But of course, we say, well, if you really focus on I5, we have the perfect place for you. Second aspect, I do see the I5 idea as a basis for a wide range of contributions, also beyond the SI. So that's what I'm the special issue. That's why I mentioned here. But you could think of case studies. You could think of a theoretical engagement with assumptions. You could think of looking at the signature moves. You could think of managerial applications for schools and their deans, for learning impact of each of the methods. And there is an example to clarify what I would see very closely connected to I5, but not necessarily part of the and a good fit for the special issue. That is exactly that question. How do I manage a business school from a business educator, from a dean perspective, from a business school manager perspective, right? How do I have an integration process including the I5? That is not as much about pedagogical innovation, about the pedagogy specifically. That would be very much about the management process. And when it's about the management process, then it doesn't fit as much the International Journal of Management Education. It wouldn't necessarily fit the idea of creative pedagogies as much. So that might, for example, be a topic that could potentially better fit into something like the Academy of Management Learning Education, which very explicitly say one big domain that we are interested in is the business of business schools, the management of business schools. So that could be a perspective where you may actually sometimes have other fields that are more suitable. If you're kind of in doubt, that's why we're here. That's why we're having these sessions. Send emails to the journal, to me, to Neil, to clarify with us if we think that fits or how to kind of frame a specific topic to fit. Also, for general further kind of research updates and opportunities, follow the PRME website, where there's often additional research and publication opportunities. One example is we're kind of planning an edited volume, so kind of more of a book on impact pedagogies for responsible leadership education, in which we showcase I5 implementation together with some theoretical perspectives. Some of these might fit into IJME, into the special issue, but I think here for the book, often it's more applied. It's closer to something like a case study, which would not be the typical format we're looking for the IJME special issue. If you're interested in that field, send me an email and put kind of I5 edited book, so I can keep you in the loop there. Otherwise, Rob Hales from Australia would be the person who is kind of leading it. But send an email to me and I'll connect you. As mentioned on the I5 website, we've got regularly opportunities that are coming up, and where we would share further aspects of them.
Okay, thank you very much for very insightful lecture, and it's really, really very important in our field because I'm working in the university, and I would like to ask you a question regarding the emerging economies, because we have plenty of international campuses, which creates a blend with local universities, for example. So what would you suggest, to focus only on international campuses to discuss the methodology and pedagogy of teaching, innovative methods, etc., or it could be interesting to blend how it is done in international campus, in international universities and the local universities?
Shall I take that, Dirk? Or do you want to take it? I mean, from my perspective, all universities are part of the readership. So I think it depends on what the contribution is that the paper is making. I think if there's a message for developing countries, great. I mean, let's hear it. But there's lots of readership from the developing nations. So I think they will depend on what the content of the paper is, what the contribution is. Don't think it has to be an international paper. It just has to appeal to an international readership. That's the difference. So we don't only produce international papers. We do produce papers that everybody in the world would find of interest. Yeah, and we've got a large readership from the developing nations.
Thank you so much.
I agree with that perspective. So you could have it as much from your kind of home campus. You could look at the perspective of the foreign campuses or of one specific away campus, or at the tension between them, or at the question, right, how do we develop something that actually works on both? And that is that kind of with that key perspective that Neil develops. But as much as for the readership, we want something that interests pretty much everybody in the world. We're a global journal. And in the same way, if you're kind of a global business school, you want to develop content and pedagogies that are relevant to a global audience, to an audience in different global locations. So from that perspective, you have a big potential.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Saloni, if you can,
Hi.
thank you. Yeah.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much for this session. I often, involve myself in some such pedagogy which involves the students, and I recently did something, so I'm very motivated to submit to your special issue. And I would want to know if there is any friendly feedback or a peer review that is possible while we are developing the paper with you all or someone.
Okay, so obviously with 1,200 papers coming in a year, I can't really offer very much advice. I can offer basic advice as to, for example, whether or not the paper is suitable for the journal or could be developed to the journal. But specific details, I just don't have the time really to offer it. I can always, I'm always very friendly and open to queries. And I tend to comment mainly on people, if they say to me, can you help me with my paper? I say, can you just send me the abstract? And I'll comment on the abstract, because that gives me the general advice I can give you. Obviously, being editor-in-chief, I have to maintain my independence anyway. I can't comment on specific papers in detail. It would jeopardize my independence. But I'm very happy to read an abstract and to comment on it and give my feedback on that, whether it's suitable for the journal or whether it's something that could be developed or is maybe better targeted elsewhere.
Thank you so much. I totally understand that. Yeah, thank you.
Also, there are journal independent opportunities of getting friendly feedback. A range of journals or of conferences offer kind of paper development workshops. There is the World Research Tour for Responsible Management Education Research, with one session Friday, so in 2 days from today, in Leuven as part of the PRME France Benelux chapter conference. But if you look out for kind of RMLE, Research of Management Learning Education, Research World Tour, you may find some further events. Often these are also kind of advertised through the PRME website. At the Academy of Management annual meeting, for example, which happens this year in August in Chicago, there are, for the different divisions, usually very specific paper development workshops. I'd be part of the Management Learning, MED, Management Education and Development paper development workshop. And if there are submissions, we would have a separate paper that kind of discuss RMLE and kind of creative pedagogy related papers, with the idea that that could connect to the special issue. That would be probably on so I think it's 9th to 13th of August, with the workshop typically being on the 9th. That would still leave you kind of 3 weeks or so to work until the paper is due to submit. So it's rather late in the process. And that is a face-to-face meeting. There are other things that have been online before, but if you look out for those, they do exist. Sometimes you may also just feel you have somebody in your institution or so to give you friendly feedback. In general, I very, very strongly advise to get some feedback and friendly review. They don't need to be experts of the journals in the field, but just kind of a colleague to have an external view on it. If you've got somebody who's got more experience in the field, ask them. And often kind of reasonably senior scholars and colleagues are often very willing to help and to support that. And that's important because it makes a tremendous difference on the journal, on the paper quality, if you had somebody with a new, fresh look from the outside giving you some feedback.
So yeah, I'm a member of MED and I'll be attending the conference in Chicago. So hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Right, Stephen, if you want to ask your question.
Yes. Good night from Malaysia. It's 20 to 10. So for me, I'd just like to get some feedback because my new role I took over this year, the PRME sits under my portfolio at the school level. Here at Sunway Malaysia, we only signed up to PRME, I think, last year. So we're relatively new in it. But it's coincided with our curriculum refresh. So we had to realign our curriculum to government standards. And at the same time, what I've been doing, I don't know if you're familiar with the PRME document. I've got it open here because I've been working on it. But the blueprint for SDG integration into curriculum, research, and partnerships. So I've been mapping our new curriculum to the SDGs, and I intend to map it to the old curriculum as well, to look at whether we're actually progressing through how we teach our curriculum. So looking at this, would that be something interesting for the issue? Because our dean is very much on board with PRME. SDGs and sustainability is one of he calls it the DNA for the business school. Would this be something that we could develop into a paper, get the dean's perspective and the implementation sort of perspective on things?
Okay, perhaps if I start with that before bringing in Dirk. But I was in a similar position to you in 2007. I was the foundation dean of a new business school in England. And the concept of having an opportunity to review an entire curriculum it does give you a perspective that is seldom possible in other business schools. So often, sustainability issues tend to be add-ons or slotted into a curriculum. And it does mean that you can actually do things differently. So our 101 course that we had was called Responsible Management, and we introduced it to the students first off. And what that meant was whatever you were teaching later on in the program, you knew that the students had this underpinning in responsible management. So they knew the terminology, they were quite happy with that terminology. And it was actually an enormous marketing feature for the program because it did distinguish the program from other programs that were not linked to PRME. So I think it's the sort of thing that happens from time to time. So I'm confident that what you've just described would be of interest, but don't be too parochial. So don't limit yourself to issues that are so specific to Malaysia. Do it more general. So this is how we took the constraints that we had from the government or whatever it is, and this is how we introduced. Yeah.
Very, very interesting, because actually, although we're bound by the Malaysian government, we're actually Lancaster University accredited. So we've got a UK partner. So we're sort of balancing between the two to find the equilibrium, which adds another sort of context to it.
Yeah. So I'm sure there'll be generalizable lessons that others will want to use. I'll hand you over to Dirk.
Yes. So first, having worked 8 years at the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China, so in Ningbo, but also UK Quality Assurance Agency, QAA accredited, I do see it absolutely as an interested topic for management education. Now, the question is, do I see that as fit for the journal? And personally, I feel I'm not convinced how much this is really a focus on creative pedagogies. So for the specific special issue, I'd put a big question mark it and say, for me at first, rather not. Now, to be honest, but this is the first kind of session of this type that we're doing. So I'd also look at Neil and say, well, to what extent would you feel this really fits with this creative pedagogy? And when we talk to Meredith and Gustavo with that before we are taking kind of clear decisions on that, but my perspective would be that sounds more like either submission to the general IJME issue or to something again, but in terms of managing or the business of business schools is a clear perfect fit with AMLE, the Academy of Management Learning and Education. So I would be more critical with regard to that. Now, Neil, do you have something to add, or how about your view on that?
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm not criticizing at all. If it's about curriculum development and pedagogy, then it fits. If it's about the management of the school, then it doesn't fit. So you have to decide, Stephen, where this sits. So if you're talking to me about, look, this is how we managed to develop our pedagogy, we've introduced a new curriculum, this is how it's gone down with the students, whatever, then yeah, that's something we can all learn from. If it's about managing the institution, then there's other journals that are better placed for that.
Okay, so one of the challenges we have faced is the Malaysian requirement was we had 50-50, 50% coursework, 50% exam. However, now they've removed that requirement. So we've actually now gone to 100% coursework to actually make it more interactive for the students. So with that then, so we can move in that direction. Would that then look at the pedagogy, the assessment into that sort of instance?
Yeah. So things like your teaching learning strategy, if it affects the classroom, right, then it's suitable for the journal. That would be my sort of like touchstone, really. And then that means that others can learn from it. Yeah, that's the key. So would a lecturer in Lancaster or in Ningbo value it? Would they look at it and think, hey, well, that's interesting what they've done there in some way. That's really interesting. We can do that here, or we can learn from what they've done there. Yeah, but it has to be linked to pedagogy, not the management of the school.
Mhm.
And
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
I would add there, it should take the perspective on how we teach things, not about what we teach as much. To some extent, when the example that Neil gave before, where he says, well, we're having essentially kind of an capstone first semester at the beginning, a course on sustainability that clarifies all the terminology. To me, at first sounds like this is what we put in there rather than how we get it across and how through teaching pedagogy we shape and we influence leaders. That's where I would kind of probably ask for a clearer focus on pedagogy in the paper if it's for the special issue.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the clarity.
Thank you, Stephen. Karen, if you want to ask your question.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions really. 2 of them are very quick and easy though, I think. The first is, what's the timeline for the turnaround? I noticed they're submitted end of August. So what's the expected turnaround time? Do you want to give a quick answer or shall I carry on?
I'll give a quick answer. The turnaround time for me will be 1 day. I do the journal every day, and so first thing in the morning I deal with all my emails from across the world. If it's suitable for the journal, I will be passing it on to Dirk for consideration. So the timeline then is the reviewers are invited. Dirk will invite 2 reviewers. If a reviewer declines, then an alternative reviewer will be invited, and they have 2 weeks to respond to the invitation. Once they respond, they've then got 1 month to submit their review, and then obviously it depends on how many rounds of review. The thing that holds up the journal more than anything is the author. Authors always say, I can't get it back in time. Can you give me more time? I haven't got enough time to revise my paper. So then that's what really takes the time. And if they do a poor job of revising it, then of course that means another round of review. So a lot of the review time is not based on reviewers. We're pretty tight with that. A lot of the review time is down to the author.
Lovely, good to know, thank you. And the other query I've got is how much, because word count is always the struggle to keep within. So as Prime is known to the journal and I5, etc., I'm assuming it's okay just to touch on those without needing to explain using words up on the context of it.
Yeah, Karen, this is a special issue. There'll be an editorial to the special issue that Dirk and the team will write. So they will obviously set your paper into a context. We don't have a word limit to the journal. Having said that, most papers come in around about 8,000 to 10,000 words, normally because reviewers say it's too long. So if a long paper comes in, yeah, they'll go to review, but the reviewers won't like it. It'll affect the readability of your work. It'll affect the citation of your work. So do your best to be as concise as possible. But remember, this is a special issue. It will carry an editorial. And so I think a lot of the context of your work will be explained in the editorial.
Brilliant, thank you. And then the final question, I would just like to understand more, because it's confusing to me, where you talk about the metrics and your statement, sorry, my voice, the current metrics of the journal are far better than higher ranked journals. You just talk me through that, please.
Okay, all right. So my performance as editor of the journal is measured by, with Elsevier, is measured by the site score. So if you look at journal site scores, and the current score you can find on Scopus rather than on the journal website. So the journal website is only updated every year. So I think the last site score of the journal was 7.1, is currently 10.2, right? That compares very favorably with AMLE. Now, the problem I've got is that all these journal quality guides around the world, they're always backward looking, and they'll take data from years gone by, and it's never up to date. But as far as the publisher is concerned, it's up there. It's in the top decile of journals in this area, and the site score is the measure that they use to measure my performance. Now, it also means that a good site score is good for your work, because it depends on where you are across the world, and what metrics are used to measure researchers. But one of the measures people use is the H index. And so they look at how often is your work cited, right? And your work will be heavily cited in this journal because it has a site score of 10.1. There are better journals, don't get me wrong, but this compares very, very favorably with journals that are ranked at a very high level in Australian Business Dean's Council, Chartered Associated Business School. There's all these sort of metrics all across the world. The publisher doesn't care about those. All they care about is that metric of sites, because citations is what drives income for them, and it's purely profit. And as far as they're concerned, this is a very successful journal.
Right, thank you very much indeed.
Great. Do we have any more questions? All right. If we don't, I will, in general, the next steps. We do have next steps. So I'm going to be dropping a survey link in the chat right now. If you want to take, it won't take you not even more than it's less than 5 minutes to do it. This will help you be eligible for the I5 certificate of engagement. I will also be sending a follow-up email. This is just for you to grab the quick link with the information about the survey, with the slides attached, with the call for papers as well on the website, at the IJME website. So you'll have all that information, and I will be CCing Dirk and Neil to that in case you want to respond and ask a specific question or grab their emails for other questions. Yeah, the book chapter details, I'm happy to share that with you as well. That's a separate thing. And the person who's going to be doing that, Rob Hales, he's having one of these sessions about I5 and community of practice later this quarter. I think it's in April, but he's New Zealand time, so it's very late our time. So he's going to be hosting that. It has nothing to do with research, but he is one of our expert pedagogy members, and he will be hosting a session with us. But I'd be happy to share more information, and Dirk as well, if you wanna. So yeah, you can email Dirk and he'll put you in contact with Rob as well and everything. But yeah,
should be 26th of March, but let me confirm. And you'd also find that on the PRME website.
Yeah, all of this, there'll be information about all this. If you just want to look at the I5 website, we have a lot of upcoming opportunities in the Go Beyond section with the rest of the certificate of engagement and research stuff. Like Dirk said, with paper development workshops, we do a lot of those with our Prime World Tour. And we just have a lot of resources. So if you want, you can reach out to me, respond to the email I'll send, and then ask for the specific things so I can give them to you. And if anyone else also wants any more Prime or I5 resources, I am very happy to share that with you guys. So yeah, now that you've grabbed the survey link, if you want to take some time to do it now, feel free, hop off, but it is required if you want to be eligible for the 2024 certificate of engagement with the I5. So thank you guys.